Okay, so let's just get comfortable, get into a nice seated position, feet grounded, hands and legs uncrossed. Posture erect with the chest open because that always feels like energy can come in when we sit with that shoulders back. Just allowing that breath to come in. And to remember that the breath is our anchor, that we always have that anchor when our minds start to wander, when emotion starts to rise, or we get distracted by sounds. The key for us is to be intentional to sit in mindfulness, but it's also to be intentional about catching ourselves when we get distracted by anything in our surroundings. And that's actually probably one of the biggest parts of the practice because we're distracted so often during the day that it's good for us to be able to catch ourselves in order to come back to the present moment, to come back to being present and to either be focusing on the breath. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. Or a step beyond that practice to be able to sit and just find the stillness so that our brains are not overactive and chasing thoughts and chasing emotions and chasing distraction, planning, noises, chatter in our heads. Instead, it's about allowing the stillness in and bringing it into awareness through a moment to moment experience. So that when I experience a moment of stillness, I can notice the silence in between. It might be in between the breath, or it might be that I have a thought or I have an emotion and I'm aware that it's there. And so my silence or my pause is in between that thought, the pause, and whatever is coming next. It might be the breath. It might be awareness of a sound. It might be awareness of more thought or emotion. And so what we want to start thinking about is that the thoughts and the emotions that are within are natural for us as human beings. There's no need for us to resist them or to fight them. But there is a learning in inquiring to understand them. So if a thought comes to my mind that I have to start planning for dinner, or I have to start planning to plant my garden, those thoughts are helpful to us in that we do need to plan certain things. But because we are intentional about sitting in a mindfulness practice, we need to be intentional about letting those thoughts and plannings go. So I'm curious that the thought has arisen. I'm not going to get attached. I'm not going to ruminate. Instead, I'm going to go back to the breath or back to the silence so that I can see each pause as it comes. When I get to the point where I am attached or I am ruminating, that is specifically my ego trying to take over my mind. And while ego is important for us, it sometimes keeps us safe. It sometimes generates ideas or creativity. It sometimes helps us to communicate with others. But there are often times when we need to let that ego go because it's keeping us stuck. When the ego takes over, that's when we are more inclined to ruminate or be attached. And like every other human being, we all experience the power of the ego. So we have to also counteract that power by asking ourselves, is this thought, is this emotion serving me? And most often, the thoughts and emotions that we experience can be fleeting, and I can let them go. But the moment we are attached or ruminating, they start to fire up that ego. And because we can latch on to these thoughts and emotions, they can really bring us down. So in our mindfulness, we want to be aware of when we have allowed it to take over, aware of when we've allowed it to draw us in. And with all the gentleness and compassion, we can teach ourselves that these thoughts and emotions are not serving us. They are part of our past or part of our future and not part of our present moment. Because our present moment is what is here right now, no matter how fleeting. And so I become aware of what's here right now. I notice the pauses, I notice the silence, and I set my intention to continue that practice. I set my intention to let the ego go and come into my heart-centered place. The place where it doesn't matter what's coming or what's being. It only matters what's here right now. Because we've set an intention to sit together in mindfulness practice during this hour, we understand that it's okay to be curious, but we also understand we cannot let it take over. Ego can really get into our way if it's powerful and if we give it the power that it is craving. And so in those times when we find ourselves getting attached or getting into a place in the past, we have to be awake enough to catch that ego and to let the ego know that right now we are going to sit in silence because we have no place to go. nothing to do. We may think we have all these places to go and things to do, but we have carved out this time. We have set that intention that right here, right now, we are going to sit for 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And so as we sit in the silence and look for the pause, we are aware and awake enough to let that ego drift away. To always come back to this beauty of the present moment. Because that stillness is beautiful. It's magnificent. It's not noisy. It's still, almost like the early morning wakening to a lake where it almost appears like a sheet of glass. Stillness. And we might see the reflection of the beauty of trees and rocks, maybe the odd building or structure we see reflected in the lake. And that's the place that we want to be. That's the place that is healing for us. That's the place where we get our most reflection and healing and learning. All the while we know that underneath that stillness of that early morning lake, there is life going on all over the place. There's the fish, the plants, all kinds of beings that are moving and running around or swimming around, and yet we still have the beauty of that stillness. We still have the beauty of the reflection. And while we don't want to lock into reflection to be analyzing, we can certainly appreciate that we can access that stillness. And even in the stillness of every lake, sometimes a fish jumps out of the water, and that creates a ripple. And instantly our mind is drawn to it because it's not something that we are experiencing in the stillness. But it's a momentary distraction. We can always choose to go back to the stillness of the lake. It might be an image that we bring into our awareness when we are feeling anxious or where we can't turn our brains off. We might just find a spot, no matter how little time we spend, to just sit, to drop into our breath so we know we have that anchor. We want to develop the confidence to have that anchor. We want to know that it is always there for us. And after we get comfortable with that stillness and the breath anchor, we create the imagery that we want to help slow us down. So today it's that imagery of a silent, almost glass-like lake. And as I said, we know there is a lot of life going on underneath it. But we also know that that life underneath has a lot to nourish us. It may nourish us in the form of food. It may nourish us in the form of keeping our environment going. And it certainly has the power to nourish us. If it's hot, we can be refreshed by it. Or we can sit and just listen to the stillness. Because in those early morning and even late night times we spend by the lake, the stillness is palpable. We can feel it and we can hear it. And we can take the energy that that is sending us and wrap it around our bodies, the energy of silence. And in that silence, we try to repeat it with intention as often as we need it. We might need that energy 10, 20 times during a day, or we might need it just once. Perhaps lying down in bed at night, noticing the mind chatter, and we just stop and bring into our awareness the stillness. And so today, as we sit in silence, we might look for those pauses between each moment. Or if that's too much, we might choose to bring the imagery of the lake, the stillness. Or we might choose to bring our breath into our awareness and either simply notice the breath or talk about I am breathing in, I am breathing out. And so for the next while, opening our chests, sitting erect, and choosing how we will spend the next moments of silence until you hear my voice again. May our minds be still as the glass lake in the morning. May our bodies be nourished and rejuvenated. May our spirits be filled with love and compassion.